with your welcome.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. This is the second annual Data Legislative Roundtable. I want to wish everybody happy holidays and safe and happy holidays, really. My name is Doug Pickford. I'm the President, CEO of Dulles Area Transportation Association. And for those of you who are not really familiar with data, as we're referred to typically, we're a community-based nonprofit that promotes sustainable transportation options that mainly are providing free, and I emphasize free, technical assistance to employers to assist their return to work strategies. And particularly when we are anticipating most folks coming back and they're implementing hybrid work schedules, we can assist you with that. Formalizing your telework programs, again, we can help with that. And as the Silver Line Phase 2 opens, hopefully implementing some additional commuter benefit programs. If your employees are already returning to the office, we have a number of programs to help with that. We have a subsidized van pool program. We can help with the ride matching and obviously getting familiar with our transit system. So my contact information will be listed in the chat room. Feel free to reach out to me as you return to work in 2022. We have a slight change in our format this year because we have a little bit of a compressed schedule due to some time constraints of some of our panelists. We're going to pretty much just move right into a question phase as our moderator, Adam Tuss, takes over. Attendees can ask questions at any time by putting those in chat, and we'll try and address as many of those as possible. And with that, I would like to recognize our sponsor today, and that's Urban Trans. And while Brent McKenzie was unavailable to say a few words today, get well. Hopefully he's watching.
Doug, I see him in the Zoom room. At least his we don't have video, but I see a name and a
he just came on
square. Yeah.
Would you like to say a few?
I don't know if he's feeling up to talking or not, but
yeah, sorry, I got my COVID booster and flu shot yesterday in preparation for the upcoming General Assembly session. I want to make sure I'm well protected, and it's doing a pretty good deal on me today. So really just wanted to say thank you to Data for all of their support throughout the years, and looking forward to the discussion today and hearing from so many of our important elected officials in the region. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. With that, then we'll turn it over to our chairman of the board, Jeff Fairfield.
Thank you, Doug. We've got an all-star group of panelists for this legislative roundtable. We expect Congressman Jerry Connolly to join us any moment from the 11th Congressional District in Virginia, but he's had some legislative commitments, so we'll have to just play that by ear. We are joined by State Senator Jennifer Boisco from the Virginia State Senate, District 33. Now, she just sent me a chat saying the fire alarm in her house is going off because her husband's cooking, but hopefully she'll be able to participate too. We have Chairman Jeff McKay from the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, Chairwoman Ann Wheeler from the Prince William County Board of Supervisors, and Supervisor Matt Letourneau from the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, also a member of the WMATA Board of Directors. So we have federal, state, local, and transportation entity representation. So very, very complete. And this is all going to be moderated by our good friend Adam Tuss, who's been a really longstanding friend of Data. Adam, I just learned recently we're interrupting your Caribbean vacation, so I apologize for that greatly.
Yeah,
but
when I said I would do this, and of course I would do this for Data because such a good event, and I actually got so many stories out of this last year. We had such good discussions, and so many of you participated in that. And then I looked at the schedule, and I was like, oh, I'm in St. Thomas that week. But hey,
Well, we were expecting you to be on the beach doing this. Any event, Adam's a great friend of Data, and as all of you know, he's the transportation reporter for WNBC Channel 4 and also weekend anchor. And as you mentioned a minute ago, you were good enough to make some, well, I guess some news was made last year, and then you put it on the broadcast. So that was really exciting. So any event, I've talked long enough. Let me hand it over to Adam, and we can begin our roundtable discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much, Doug. Thanks for Data for having me do this again. Good to see so many familiar faces, people I've known for a long time. Senator Boisco, Mr. McKay, who I've known since you were on the Metro board, Mr. Letourneau, who currently deals with some of my questions sometimes, and Chair Wheeler, who we're fortunate to have with us as well, and Congressman Connolly, who I've known since my first child was born. And that child is now almost 12 years old. So that tells you my history. Listen, I think we should just have a discussion about where things are. The last time we had this talk last year, the really interesting thing that I think came out of our discussion last year, we were talking about vaccines, right? We were talking about when they were going to actually start to get rolled out, because they hadn't even been rolled out yet. And then one of the really interesting things, and one of the things that I put on the news, because it was a really good piece of information, is we were talking about the order of who should be getting the vaccines and whether or not transit officials and first responders and all those kind of things happen. And of course, we know how this last year has played out. It's been a really interesting one as well. I still don't think we're back to normal by any sense of the imagination. We're here doing a Zoom. I mean, that just kind of tells you where we are. I saw something from Axios today, actually, that aside from San Francisco, Washington, D.C. is one of the cities that has had the largest decrease in the amount of commuters still going downtown. So clearly our patterns have not gotten back to where they need to be. Metro is not at anywhere near capacity. And of course, we're dealing with the issues there. But there are things happening. You know, the infrastructure bill has been passed. We're talking about Build Back Better. And a lot of things along those lines. So I'm just going to start off by, I know we weren't going to do Congressman Connolly when he comes on, he's pressed for time, but let's just go down the line and everyone talk about, kind of what you think your priorities are for the current moment. We'll keep it short, maybe a minute or two. And let's start with Mr. McKay from Fairfax.
I'm here.
Is Congressman Connolly here?
He is.
We are graced by your presence, sir.
But I want to hear Jeff McKay.
So let's do this first. Let's do Jeff, and we'll go down the line. But we do want to make sure we get some comments in from you, Mr. Connolly. So go ahead, Jeff. Start us off.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. And it's great to see everyone and our a former chair of the county board, of course, our Congressman Connolly. I'll be very brief. I think you outlined well that we're certainly not back to normal, but I'd be remiss to not point out we're seeing some really positive signs for our economy in Fairfax County. If it weren't for a lot of the federal aid, maybe these wouldn't be as robust, which is why the importance of federal, state, and local partnership. But every year we do an annual review, financial annual review of the fiscal year. And we just got ours for this last fiscal year, and sales and use tax collection information, which we're looking at very carefully. Our sales tax collections up $14 million from the previous year. When you look at permits, building permits, we processed 7,000 more building permits last year than we did the year before. So we are seeing a lot of promising signs on the horizon when you look at the long-term fiscal impact of the pandemic and where we are today. And really, I think that's because of a lot of decisions we made as a region as to how we were going to respond to this pandemic in the first place. Certainly, as I mentioned, the federal assistance, but at a local level, focusing on vaccine, getting our people vaccinated, being able to get people back to work to some sense of normalcy. Ann Wheeler and I were just downtown earlier today at an event for COG. It was the first big open event that COG has held since the pandemic began. And we wouldn't have been sitting there if it weren't for the way in which we approached our vaccines in Northern Virginia. And so while there's still some significant impacts to transportation, particularly transit, We're certainly seeing an uptick in congestion, in people out on the roads, in our retail sales, in our building permits, and some of the key economic indicators that are so important to us at local government and really to us as a region. And so I think there's reason to really be optimistic here. I think all of us are approaching with caution in everything that we do. But frankly, I think, some of the worst of what the pandemic was expected to bring us, at least from a financial standpoint, thankfully has not been being realized. It certainly has when it comes to loss of life and impact to transit in particular. But we're emerging in a very positive way here. We're seeing some really positive indicators as we move forward. And that's something that, us in the government and business industry should be quite excited about. And looking back over the last 20 months, all the challenges that we've been through, as you kind of touched on a minute ago, Adam, we have also a lot to be proud of here. And we have a lot to look forward to, certainly over the next year as we enter into a new year.
Well, piggybacking off that, Congressman, since we only have you for a couple of minutes here, something to be proud of, clearly a bipartisan infrastructure bill that goes through tons of money that's going to be coming. I think in Virginia alone, it's billions of dollars for roads and transit. We only have you for 15 minutes, so you have to make news quick. What's going to happen? Where's the money going? What do you see? What do you want to see happen?
Well, as you know, it's a $1.2 trillion investment in infrastructure, and I hope all of that money comes to Northern Virginia.
that would be some news if we got $1.2 trillion.
So, as Jeff indicated, and, been a privilege during the pandemic to work with Jeff and Ann in Fairfax and Prince William counties to make sure that resources are available. We had to fight for that. There was a strain of thought led by the minority leader in the Senate, and at the time, the majority leader at the Senate, that actually states and localities didn't need any help and they should file for bankruptcy if they had a problem. And so fighting that mentality and getting between the two bills about $500 billion that flowed to states and localities and school systems, I think has made an enormous difference in stabilizing the ups and downs during this pandemic for our counties and our cities and towns. And I'm very proud of the fact that translated into hundreds of millions of dollars for Fairfax and for Prince William County. And it also meant that we stabilized funding for Metro for 2 consecutive years in which we 100% pretty much at the federal level, we took care of the funding gap in Metro. So they didn't have to go through draconian cuts that otherwise they would have had to go through, closing stations, cutting way back on service, laying people off. Those were all things they were contemplating, none of which they had to do because of federal funding. In this bill, I'm very pleased, a local thing, but it matters to us, right, is that my Metro bill, authorizing $150 million a year, goes through 2030. So we got the authorization for what we call PREA funding for Metro, which is a capital investment at the federal level for a 10-year period. And that really helps stabilize. And beyond that, we provided an additional 80 to 100 million with increased formula funding for transit. So, the guess I've seen is that in the metropolitan area, not just Virginia specific, but the metropolitan area, we're possibly going to benefit to the tune of about $18 billion in new infrastructure injection. And that means bridges and rail and bus systems and broadband and all kinds of other things that needed investment and that are now going to get it. And so I think that's a huge step forward for our region. The Long Bridge, other projects that have sort of been on the back burner because of lack of investment and funding, I now hope we can move up to the front burner with this federal funding. And it's long-term, so it's going to be a gift that keeps on giving. And of course, the returns on these investments are also going to be enormous. So whatever it costs to build the original metro system in metropolitan Washington. Think about the economic development it's spurred, and the return on that investment has been many, many multiple fold. And I believe, and certainly our hope is that with this infrastructure funding, the same will happen. So it's good news for our local governments, good news for state government, and it's good news for Metro.
Well, Congressman, has anything shifted though in the way that people will have to not only apply for this funding, but the projects that we want to fund, right? Has the world changed permanently? I think that's on a lot of people's minds. Are we going to go back to the way that the commute once was? In a lot of respects, people probably like the fact that there isn't a lot of traffic or not as much as it was. I know we're ticking up, sure. But should we be thinking differently about the projects that we fund?
Yeah, I hope so. And I'll give you a small example. And I know our local government reps can sympathize with this. When we were doing the Silver Line, what drove me crazy was how complicated the funding formula was and the approval process was for transit versus highway. So, the Highway Trust Fund is pretty simple, right? We authorize and appropriate X number of dollars. They're divvied up based on a fairly straightforward formula to states, and the states then fund projects, state and local. That's it. Maybe you need an environmental assessment, maybe you don't. When it comes to transit, we have to go through we've got to have clear plan for local funding. We have to show ridership projections and density to justify the investment. We have to do all kinds of environmental assessments. We have to compete ourselves with roads and with buses and other forms of transportation to demonstrate the need and the viability and so forth, right? And then, if you get through that, and then you've got to do engineering and preliminary engineering, and then you got to revise the estimates and so forth. All of this required by the federal formula, very little of which is required for roads and bridges. And so little wonder that local governments are frankly discouraged from wanting to undertake large, transit projects because it's just too difficult, and the federal assistance and the federal requirements are so onerous that frankly building a road is a lot easier. So my hope is that with the infrastructure bill, there'll be enough new investment that we can try to streamline the process and incentivize localities to consider and undertake transit projects instead of simply falling back on lots of new and expanded roadways. Can we do things differently? Now, there are some things that are not, that are, well, the infrastructure bill also provides a lot of money for broadband. Broadband is also another way, to your point, Adam, of how we do things differently, right? If I can do remote learning, if I can do remote work, because I've got robust broadband, it can transform my life, and I'm not on the roads commuting. And so different modes of work require investment, however, right? And one of those investments is the IT, the technology that allows me to do that. And the more we can encourage that, the more we can reduce pollution, improve quality of life, improve productivity, and reduce congestion. In a big congested area like Northern Virginia, that's not a theoretical concern for us. Those are real concerns.
Gotcha. And I promise I'm going to get to everybody else. But again, Congressman, because we've only got you for a couple of minutes, I do want to get your take on the current Metro situation. Tell me your confidence in the general manager. Tell me what you think about the problems. These are major problems. It's potentially catastrophic if they can't get their cars back on track. You've been a champion for Metro. Tell me about what you think right now.
I have been a champion for Metro, and I remain a champion for Metro, but I also believe in accountability. And I think Metro has to account for the fact that they essentially hid the fact that they had a safety problem with the Series 7000 cars for 4 years. For 4 years, they didn't tell anybody. They didn't tell the IG, they didn't tell the the commission, the safety commission. They didn't tell members of Congress, and I gather they didn't even tell their own board, let alone local government and state government, who, after all, pay the bills. And that's, for me, as I'm a Catholic, that's in the category of mortal sin. And they're going to have to explain themselves and account for that. I've held off holding hearings on that, but I am going to have hearings on it in my subcommittee, and I'm going to do it jointly with Eleanor Holmes Norton, who chairs a committee of jurisdiction on the transportation committee. Although my committee, Government Ops, actually has jurisdiction over Metro. So we're going to do it jointly. I wanted to hold off until, frankly, we got the infrastructure bill passed, because I didn't want to do anything that could jeopardize long-term investments in Metro. But they're going to have to explain themselves, and I don't think that's going to be a very comfortable hearing for the general manager or his cohorts, because the fact of the matter is, you knew about this for 4 years and didn't tell anyone, and that put the public at risk. And if we're going to win back confidence, such that riders, return, they've got to have confidence that you're not, hiding safety issues from them, and that you are being straight and playing straight. And this doesn't help that at all. So we're certainly going to give that a public hearing and try to understand better what happened and how do we make sure we put guardrails in place so it doesn't happen again.
Did you have a time frame for that hearing?
Sometime after the first of the year. I mean, I've got kind of a backlog of hearings on a gazillion subjects. But I don't want it to go too long, between, say, public story and our having an oversight hearing. So my guess is sometime after the first of the year, I hope fairly early, January, February timeframe.
Congressman, I do appreciate you making some news there, because that is certainly news. Well, Supervisor Letourneau, let me get your thoughts on that. Obviously you've been on the Metro board for a while now. You guys have all said that you weren't told about this problem. The board chair continues to express confidence in the general manager, but tell me your thoughts as a board member and as a Loudoun County supervisor looking at this, and now Metro is about to come to Loudoun County, right? Looking at all of that and how it all kind of plays out with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that, Adam. And I want to start by thanking Congressman Connolly for some of the things he mentioned, especially the assistance we've received for the last couple of years to be able to continue to operate the system. He's been such a great champion along with our congressional delegation, and we really do appreciate it. I do want to address his concerns, though, specifically about this situation, which of course is currently an active NTSB investigation, which limits a little bit what we can say. But I think it's important to draw a distinction between what occurred in the last 4 or 5 years and then the derailment situation that occurred this year. What occurred in the last several years have been out of variance inspections on the order of 3 to 5, as many as maybe 6 a year, out of many, many, many thousands. What we've learned is that in any type of inspection situation, when you inspect something every 90 days, as we were doing with these cars, that's normal. That's not something that's unusual. And those were addressed. Never at any point was a train put back in service after an inspection. And again, only a handful that had those issues. That was a discussion that was occurring between the manufacturer and Metro. What happened this year is very different. And that is of concern to us. And so, the highest priority for the board is the safety of our riders. The board has taken, I think, significant steps to improve the Rail Operations Control Center, to change the personnel, to bring in now a outside safety consultant to the board to help advise us. But I do think it's important that folks understand that difference, because we inspect components of our system every day. And those things do occur, and that's why you have inspections as you do in aviation and other things. This situation with the derailment is different. We do need to understand better with the NTSB process, what happened, particularly with the manufacturing process that led to this. And we are a part of that investigation, so we're waiting, as others are, and working with our Metro Rail Safety Commission to get those results.
Still a little troubling, though, that the general manager was never told about this, right? I mean, from your perspective, and I've asked him to, over and over again over these last couple of weeks, why didn't you know about it? And he still claims he doesn't know about it. And the answer you get is that, well, the maintenance, that basically can stay within the maintenance department, and they don't have to raise it to another level.
So, Adam, I think every day Metro is inspecting components. Every single day we have folks inspecting all sorts of different components. When the general manager, from my point of view as a board member, when the board and when the general manager should be told about something is when there's something unusual occurring. And so I am troubled about the current situation, about exactly what was known when, and both for the general manager's point of view and the board. What was occurring in the past was not unusual. And so that's the answer that the general manager has given us. I think to answer your question, yes, he does retain our confidence. I think he is doing everything possible. He has shown, and I think what's unique about his leadership is that he has shown he will put safety first. He is not afraid to take a dramatic step if it's needed to put safety first. And I'm not sure that was always the case. So, that's all we can ask for. But the board, once we understand the full situation, obviously the board is going to address it and take the steps that we would need to take.
All right, thank you.
Adam, I'm just going to add a little bit to that. I mean, I'm not going to gainsay what Matt said, but I do think it's important. First of all, I don't know what Paul Wiedefeld knew or didn't know. I've had no conversation with the general manager, none. And I'm one of the people that certainly has brought hundreds of millions of federal dollars in the last 15 months to Metro, including long-term 10-year funding. And so the lack of communication is frankly very troubling and not a confidence building kind of measure. With respect to what Matt said on sort of not unusual or making sure that safety wasn't compromised. Well, remember the Safety Commission pulled all 7,000 series cars, all of them, 700 of them, out of service because in fact it found that cars that were problematic were in fact being put back in service, including one that had derailed. And so I do think that that's why we need to have oversight hearings and understand the narrative and the chronology and what Matt described. If that's the case, it may be less troubling than public reports that we've gotten. But I'm very troubled by the reaction of the Safety Commission that seemed not at all persuaded that safety was coming first in how this situation was being managed at some level in Metro. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. It wasn't just, some whistleblower said, hey, we got a problem. It was the Safety Commission itself, and it led to a draconian measure, namely all 7,000 series cars are pulled from service. That's never happened before. And that's a very grave kind of action that the Safety Commission felt warranted because of concerns of public safety and ridership.
Yeah, and we still don't know when they're going to get back in service. And that's the big thing here. And for everyone who's on this Zoom right now and is a part of this meeting right now, I mean, the importance of asking these questions is just because so much money goes to Metro, right? We need to know where the millions and millions and millions of dollars are being spent and if they're being spent appropriately, and how important Metro is to the entire region, how much development is being built around Metro. So I'm sorry to turn this first part of the program into the Metro show and what's going on, but it's so vitally important. It's the skeletal system of our entire region. And if it fails, then we got a big problem. So, it's important to ask these questions, and I thank everyone for their candor. I do want to get to some other people though. Chair Wheeler, why don't you give us some of your thoughts about kind of where things are from your standing with Prince William County, what you'd like to see infrastructure Bill, anything in your mind?
Well, I'll tag on to what Chair McKay was saying is that, thanks to Congress Connolly's support for local government over the last year, 18 months, we find ourselves in a pretty strong position. We were able to sort of stabilize everything that was going on to the point where we are in a good financial spot. So that's the good news, because we did get that support for our local operations, for our communities, as well as our transportation, our transit systems, which really helped keep them in place. We're looking forward to, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed. We're looking forward to having some really good things come out of that. And I think someone already mentioned the Long Bridge. Of course, we have light rail with VRE, and that's a game changer for us. And so just having that on the horizon, and, it was always on its way, but having definite funding that could go to it really makes a difference. Prince William County is still growing, still building roads, looking at different transit systems. And so this gives us an opportunity going forward to see, where we might be able to get more funds to do that. I will say we've been really lucky over the last many years that, at the moment we have $750 million of projects going on, across the county. And of course, some of it with catch-up work to do, but we really have, I look outside and I drive around, we have a lot going on. And our commuters are somewhat back. I came off the highway from DC today and noticed that one of the commuter lots that we're about to expand was full. And I was sort of surprised. And I will say one of the questions that came up this morning when we were all talking is, what is the federal government going back to work? Because we really aren't going to be at it. We're not going to know for us what our new normal is. School's back. People are going back for that. But so much of our workers are federal. And so what is that going to look like? I don't think we're going to know for a while what the new normal looks like. And I think our ability to pivot is going to be really, really important.
Yeah, one thing that certainly hasn't changed is 95 is still terrible. So I'm put you on the spot. How do you fix that?
Well, I will say, the express lanes, Transurban just announced that they're putting express lane access on Opitz Boulevard near our new commuter station that we're building. So we have a lot of things that are in the works. I think will make things much better going forward in the long run. But it's going to take a while for all those things. And I just don't. I sit on the NVTA board. I don't think we really know what the new normal is going to look like and when transit's going to come back. I think it will come back, but our roads are already back. They might not have the same pattern, but we still have a lot of cars back on the road, almost to pre-pandemic levels, just in a different pattern. And what does that mean?
Right. And certainly in your district, in your county, you had some of those so-called, super commuters who would get up and watch, me at 4 a.m. on TV. People are always like, who's watching you at 4 a.m? Well, you be, pandemic, we had strong numbers, but that we've even seen, because we get our ratings every day, that's even, right?
Yep.
With behaving and commuting and those kind of things. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Changes isn't bad. The new normal. As long as we're able to adjust to that and have the resources to adjust to that, I think we'll be fine. We might come out better at the other end.
Good stuff. Senator Boisco, your thoughts about what's going on in Virginia, what needs to happen, and where you see things with the infrastructure bill?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I also serve, I'm the representative for the Virginia Senate to the NVTA board. And, our legislative priorities are going to be protecting our dedicated revenue sources and our power to make those decisions for ourselves in Northern Virginia so that we can do the good work that we know that we need to do. We also want to make sure that we're going to try to restore some of the long-term funding to the authority, hoping that we can get some of these transportation dollars, the $38.5 million, hoping that we can, fill our coffers back up. And then we're also looking at broadband. I'm the chair of the Broadband Advisory Council, and when I joined the Broadband Advisory Council in 2016, we had $1 million to spend for the entire year. We have just gotten, thanks to Congressman Connolly and our federal legislators, $700 million, with more on the way with the Build Back Better plan. And we are working to implement broadband throughout the entire Commonwealth, which will help us get people off the roads, because we know that in Northern Virginia, especially, I believe we are the highest number of telecommuters, teleworkers in the entire country as of right now, because we do have a good system up here in Northern Virginia. And I will continue to work on that to make sure that it is affordable and accessible to everybody. I just got back from the Council of States, State Governments Conference in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and many of the things that we're talking about today, they're talking about all over the country. So making sure that we are, making smart investments in our infrastructure system, in our public transit, shoring up our, environmentally thoughtful plans. So the electrification of vehicles and making sure that we have charging stations. It's going to be a major piece of the conversation that we're going to be having in Richmond this year. Last year, we did legislation. I carried legislation that puts planning to make sure that we have charging stations infrastructure throughout Virginia, and it's well planned so that people who live in apartments have a place to charge their cars. Our airports and our buses, thinking logistically through that. And additionally, the automobile industry has gotten behind this as well. They're from the dealers to the manufacturers, and we have Volkswagen right here in our neck of the woods, are all saying that within 10 to 15 years, they expect that electric vehicles are going to be the majority of what they are selling. And so we've got to make sure that we're ready for that. Additionally, talking about broadband and being able to do our meetings remotely, local governments have real challenges with the regulations around how many meetings a person can do remotely and quorum calls and stuff like that. So I know that there are some efforts to clarify some of that, so that especially those people who are not elected officials but might sit on boards and commissions or other public bodies would have more flexibility in doing those from home rather than going out to those meetings. I know that when we have our meetings for the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, some folks have to drive out, an hour to get there. Some of the other stuff that we're, focusing on is long-term planning. And so the NVTA, the transaction plan is being updated right now. And we are hoping to have input from local officials, from residents, from stakeholders, to make sure that we're doing the best thing that we can as we lay out the plans for the next 20 years. The current transaction plan that we have identifies more than 350 multimodal projects. So it's not just, laying tar on the road, but it's also bike and pedestrian accessibility. It's thinking more holistically. And it's important that we have input from the public. So I do hope that folks will take time to reach out and make your voices heard. I think in the legislature, what we're going to be seeing is a real rebalancing of priorities. So you all are aware that we recently had a change in administration from Democratic to Republican. The good thing that I think is that our new incoming governor comes from Northern Virginia. He lives in Fairfax County. He understands the challenges that we have. And so I'm optimistic that we'll have a good working relationship with him. The incoming House of Delegates has also shifted its leadership. And so we've had our Speaker of the House has been a Northern Virginia resident, Eileen Fillercorn. The incoming Speaker is from Shenandoah and has a very different philosophy on transportation funding and priorities. And it will be imperative that everybody who cares about those things uses their voices again to let us know what's on your mind and to help guide that conversation. I know you all have done such a good job with data, and I've enjoyed working with you also. I'm looking forward to that continued conversation. As far as what, I'm hoping that we can hold on to the the floor on the gas tax. Delegate Watts worked hard to get that passed last year, and we had a bipartisan major transportation infrastructure bill a couple of years ago, sponsored by Senator Saslaw and Speaker Fillercorn, hoping that all of the work that we did there, we can preserve. A lot of, I think, what we will see in the General Assembly this year will be protecting the work that we've done so that we don't go backwards. There will be major pushes to gut the revenue stream. But I think you will find that your legislators here in Northern Virginia will be steadfast and fight to preserve transportation. We know that that is the linchpin to a successful economy. And, you know, we're so happy that we came through this pandemic. Thank God for our congressional leaders like Jerry Connolly and all the other ones who really provided that buffer so that we can, you know, land on our feet and move forward in a really good posture for our economy. Our unemployment rate is down, and people are ready to be back to work. And so I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you all today, and you know, just appreciate all of our elected officials who are working so hard every single day. It's been a really tough couple of years for all of us, I think, especially for our local guys.
For sure, Senator, for sure. You know, Chair McKay, she raises an interesting point about broadband. I really think this is one of the kind of forgotten topics of the infrastructure bill. Everyone says it, roads, bridges, broadband, but there are so many communities that don't have access to like proper broadband, right? So take us through Fairfax County, for example. How do you go in and channel that effort? How do you get the dollars to flow where they need to go? And how do you make sure that people are able, say they want to change permanently, they want to, you know, work remotely, they want to be able to take classes online? How do you go and make sure that every community has that?
Well, the first thing we did was make sure through the Virginia Association of Counties that our legislators in Richmond understood that broadband was an issue everywhere. So often the word rural is attached to the beginning of it. And I certainly don't want to undermine the significant challenges that rural Virginia has with broadband, but we have significant challenge in urban areas as well. Some of it in areas where income is a real challenge to even pay for the service, much less have it available and accessible. And so we've done a thorough analysis in the county as part of our equity plan and identifying exactly where areas are underserved either by structural means, meaning the utilities have an issue, and also areas where people just frankly can't afford the monthly bill. And we, you know, one thing we did gain out of COVID is we were able to inventory through our school children very closely where we had issues where kids couldn't connect. And we found in almost all of those cases, it was a financial issue as much as it was a utility availability issue. And so we have both of those things going on at the same time. And I think it's not only important for schools and education, as you mentioned, but certainly for the economy. I mean, one of the things, you know, I was sharing some economic numbers earlier in this call. One of the ones that really jumped out and grabbed me was last year, there were 4,000 less cars registered in Fairfax County than the year before. It is the only time I can ever remember where year over year there weren't more vehicle registrations. So that tells you something. And I don't think it's just that, you know, people had a bunch of excess vehicles they were getting rid of. I think some of it was that. I think vehicle prices were high, so there was good reason to trade in. But I think the other reason is because there's a lot more people who have been working from home for a long period of time and are accustomed to and maybe doing that permanently. And they can't do that without broadband. And so if we're to look at, you know, being able to be that flexible moving forward, and, you know, one of the other pieces we're looking at in the county very carefully is the gender issues associated with this, you know, from an equity standpoint, especially when it comes to having to care for kids and when schools are closed and what happens in dual working families and single parents, which we have a lot of in Fairfax County. Being able to shift and go online when you have a family emergency and illness, something like that should be able to be more the norm as we move forward and not the exception. So there's a huge equity component of this broadband issue that, you know, needs to be talked about thoroughly. And those issues exist across the Commonwealth. And my hope is that a lot of jurisdictions have done what we've done and very carefully inventoried and mapped where those challenges are, so that when this money does become available, we can on day one be putting it exactly in the areas that need it most.
And can I just follow up on that? Because we have a great system in Virginia, VOTI grants, the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative, where localities along with a private provider can apply for a grant that will pay for the majority of the work that they're doing. And the locality puts skin in the game, the private provider puts skin in the game, and then they get these grants. We also have allowed our public utilities, like our, our electricity companies and co-ops, to participate in this, so that when they're already out, hardening the grid and redoing their work, they can go and lay the middle mile fiber in the ground at a much more affordable rate. And so that is, I think that of the entire state, I think we've only got a handful of counties who have not taken advantage of those applications. And additionally, on the affordability side, we are going to be seeing major funding coming from the federal government, and Senator Warner's been working on this really hard, so that we are going to have an actual subsidy. The providers already have a subsidy program allowed, and I've worked with our school systems to make sure that they can communicate directly with those providers to let the families know about these subsidy programs. But we're going to see an additional amount of money coming from the federal government, thanks to Senator Warner in great part, who will actually help offset even more, so that especially our communities of great need, which I represent in the Herndon and Sterling areas, will have access to that as well. Because like Jeff said, it's not just having the infrastructure, which most of us have around here, but it's also the affordability piece. And we're working on two fronts to make sure that we address those at the state perspective. And I've been asked to speak about this around the country. So other states don't have this kind of planning. I mean, we are really ahead of the curve. We are really on board. It's going to be imperative that, we have people who are skilled, who can do this infrastructure work. That's one of the concerns that we have. And also that we have the materials. With the shortage of materials, that might slow things down. So we all need to be watching out for that as well.
Yeah, and this kind of digital infrastructure is going to become so important over the next couple of years. I mean, people don't really think about it like roads and bridges and metro and transit, but that's really what it is in some ways, when you don't have to commute. And as Supervisor McKay mentions, if you don't have access to it and it's not equitable, then it becomes a whole bigger issue. Supervisor Letourneau, let me talk to you for a second. Obviously, in your county, in your districts, a lot of the internet of the world passes through there. How does something like this affect Loudoun County, where you're talking about new investments, and is it more data farms? I mean, I'm looking at this as a layman's perspective. I have literally no idea. What does it mean when something like that happens?
Well, first of all, Loudoun is an interesting place because we have both a rural and a urban and suburban component. And we are taking advantage of that program, over $12 million as part of an overall $72 million Board of Supervisors program to expand rural broadband. We are kind of the internet capital of the world, and we're proud of that fact. But we're also the fastest growing county in Virginia, and we lead Virginia in new investment over the last half decade. So a lot's happening here. We have a lot of needs. I don't know that the data center industry is really happening in the private sector. It's something that we're actually working closely to try to control to some extent, because we don't want to be too reliant on that one revenue source. It's actually close to 50% of our total government revenue at this point, but it can be kind of volatile. So you want to be careful about that, but we still continue to welcome that. I think what I'm really excited about when we look at the overall infrastructure picture is the opportunity to continue to make investments. Loudoun and Slam in particular are still growing really rapidly, and we have areas that we simply need to still build roads. We need trails. We need to build our infrastructure around metro. In my district alone, we have two projects that are both over $100 million each. We as a county cannot do those things by themselves. I think particularly for this data audience, it's important to highlight the southern area around Dulles Airport and the Route 50 corridor that I represent. We've put a lot of investments into the Route 7 corridor with the help of VDOT. In the county itself funding, but now it's time to really look at Route 50, which has a tremendous amount of congestion. So we really want to improve the intersection at Loudoun County Parkway and Route 50. We have a project to build a collector road between Route 28 and Tall Cedars Parkway, and both of those things will really help airport access from the south, help with their future plans, and they'll help get people to transit stations and Metro. So a lot happening in Loudoun. I think there's a lot of opportunities to take advantage of all these type of funds that are coming in. And we're very fortunate, as the others are, to have an economy that continues to grow.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Will the Silver Line to Dulles be open by the spring?
I'm not going to make any predictions. I'd probably be more likely to if I wasn't on the Metro board, but I know I have certain responsibilities there. I can tell you that we're very pleased with the progress that's been made in terms of reaching substantial completion on phase 2 of both the rail project and the rail yard itself. We do have a ways to go. As we've talked about today, it's really important that we get this right. And once Metro takes control of that project, it's ours. We own it. We do have some significant fiscal issues, which we should probably address a little bit later, perhaps. But we really need to make sure the Silver Line is concerned that it is safe, that everybody will have confidence in it. So we're going to go through this testing period. It's going to last for a period of time. The Metro Rail Safety Commission is doing the same thing and coming in. And then we'll be in sort of an operational readiness stage where Metro will start really ramping up with its daily testing and being ready for operations. So I don't know exactly when that will occur. I do know, we've been waiting a long time. I hope that the Safety Commission has a sense of urgency with their work, because I know that we do at Metro, since Silver Line is so important and there's so many great projects in Fairfax and Loudoun counties along the Silver Line that we're all waiting for. But I don't want to put an exact date on it.
That's fair. I think it's fair to say we're closer than we were yesterday. So that's probably what we can say about the project. Do you see it as a game changer, though? Do you think once it comes to Loudoun, this is something that people take to immediately?
I think so. And I think, I'm sure Chairman McKay has some thoughts on this, but I think once the trains actually started running in phase 1, it really made a difference in terms of development. In terms of really accelerating some of those things from just concepts to really construction on the ground. And I think we're going to see something similar in phase 2. We have a pretty exciting project that's right on the border of Loudoun and Fairfax County called Ravana Innovation Station. And actually, interestingly, came from the work that we did together to bid for Amazon. And we weren't technically successful in that. It went to Arlington and Alexandria, but Loudoun and Fairfax really worked closely together to jointly develop a site that was on both sides of the county line. And I think we actually had an incredibly strong pitch for Amazon, just slightly different than what they were looking for in terms of they wanted something that had already been built to a certain extent that they could move into quicker. But now we're taking advantage of that with the greenfield development opportunity right on the Metro Silver Line, right next to Dulles Airport. I think it's one of the most exciting opportunities in the entire country when you look at it. So, I do think, having the trains running will help accelerate that kind of development.
Well, Chairman McKay, it's pretty obvious when you go through Tyson's nowadays, when you go out to Reston, you look at the development, it's there. And whether or not it comes back next year, the year after that we don't know. But the development has followed the pattern. And this is what the Tyson's Land Use Task Force was all about, right? This is what the planning envisioned, capturing 100,000 people drive into Tyson's every day. Is it starting to materialize?
Without a doubt. The Tyson's plan is years ahead of where it was projected to be at this point in terms of total amount of construction that's taken place. I mentioned earlier, 7,000 more building permits this past year than the year before. A good chunk of those are because of development happening in and around the Silver Line. And so, from the private sector standpoint, they know it's here. It's a matter of when it opens. So, the most convincing part, obviously, was getting construction going and seeing that guarantee that the rail line was going to be built before people made investments. Keep in mind that, these developments sometimes take multiple years. In almost every case, the type of scale we're talking about take multiple years to realize. And so if you look at the clip that we've been under and the fact that it's unrelenting, it's very positive from the development standpoint. I think the biggest challenge we're going to have is maintaining the value of association with Metro over the long term. And what we've got to do is make sure these people use the system. Because that's really going to be what tells all. And that's why the conversations about safety and how we get riders back in the system, are so important, because, we've had it in Tyson's for a while. We're proud of the development that's happening around it. We need much higher ridership numbers, and we need them to come back quickly to confirm to investors that, being close to Metro is a long-term good, wise investment. And that's where the ridership numbers become, a really integral part of this. But there is no doubt that Metro is a huge driver of economic development. And frankly, it's not even just happening in Tyson's. We're seeing significant development in and around the Huntington Station at the end of the yellow line. Huntington Station's been there for decades and been underutilized and ignored. And now we're seeing record number of units and rezonings and replannings and development happening in that part of the county as well. And so, clearly people still want to be near Metro. Clearly, as people are reevaluating their lifestyles, they don't want to sit in cars. They don't want to be those mega commuters. They want to spend more time with their family. They don't want to be stressed out. They're reconsidering their work environment. They're reconsidering their stress level. And transit can be a huge component in relieving so many of those stresses. And so the long-term prognosis here is very good. What's happened over the last couple of years, even in the pandemic, in terms of development capacity, has been very positive. But we as a region, including the business community, need to be looking at how we get people in those trains and how quickly we can. And so I'm with Matt. I'm not going to predict a date for opening the extension. Obviously, we're really glad to see some of the recent announcements about where progress has been made. I'm glad that a lot of the work that's been done at Metro has been being done at a time when ridership is low because of COVID, and hopefully when the floodgates do reopen entirely, and I think the federal government reopening is a driver, we will be ready with a much safer, sophisticated system, and that extension will be ready to open. And so we want it done quick. We want it done as soon as possible, but, and Matt can appreciate this, wearing two hats like I did on the Metro board for a long time. It is very important to local governments that all the pieces of this are done and done right, so that local governments aren't stuck holding the financial bag for any challenges with the construction or racing to open it too early. We talked about the expense of Metro, and we just got to keep our eye on that. We got to open it and open it when it's ready, make sure that local governments aren't stuck with any of the unfinished business associated with it or long-term challenges, and get people back in trains as quickly as we can.
Yeah, Adam, if I could just jump in on that last point, that's exactly right. And I think that's where the board is in terms of making sure that all of these items have been addressed one way or the other before we do take ownership of it. But in terms of getting riders back, we're anticipating being somewhere around 65% of our ridership in the not the coming fiscal year, but the one after that. And that will, because of these big changes, we are taking a broader look at the way that the system is being used. Does it make sense anymore to have peak versus off-peak fare? Should we be looking at a little bit flatter system in terms of fare structure? In the middle of a fiscal crisis is sometimes not the ideal time to be making changes, but it also gives you the opportunity to sort of look more broadly. And that's what the board is doing. You're not going to see those changes in this coming budget, but these are discussions that the board's having for the future, and we're having quite a few of them. Now, I do want to flag, and I think this is really important. I know Congressman Connolly isn't with us now, but we do have an impending fiscal cliff at Metro once again in about a year's time if we don't have more assistance coming. And that's simply because the federal money will run out. We're projecting, a certain amount coming from ridership and revenues. We're projecting a certain amount coming from our local and state partners. But we'll have a gap of about $500 million in FY24. And so I'm saying that in every venue that I speak at, because I want to make sure that our congressional leaders understand it. It's not a unique situation to Washington. The large transit systems around the country, whether it's New York, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, Washington, all are in this boat where we're all going to run out of money. And when we did get the federal money, it was with the mandate to be ready to support the recovery. So stay open, don't lay off employees, keep stations open, keep service as good as you can. And that's what we've done. So we are not taking steps in this 23 budget to reduce service to save money. But in the future, a year from now, we will have to start looking for those things if we don't have more assistance coming. I know that's an uphill battle, but I think it's something that all of our congressional leaders in particular are going to need to understand.
We have a question from the chat here. It says, right now, Silver Line trains are running every 24 minutes. What does it mean for phase 2 ridership if the station's open with limited service? How do we balance opening phase 2 with train frequency that will attract riders? That's a good question. And maybe for you, Supervisor Letourneau, since you're on the board and you guys are having these discussions, what do you do to get riders to come back? But in the meantime, it might take them a half hour, in between trains.
They're running at 24 minutes right now solely because of the 7000 series issue and the fact that we had to take more than half of the fleet out of service. And so that has impacted the timing schedules. The upcoming budget anticipates frequencies of around 12 minutes at the worst for the Silver Line, which I think is pretty solid service. 24 minutes is also sort of the low end even right now. We are seeing some gradual improvement as we get more of the older cars back in the fleet. And of course, we're eagerly anticipating the work we're doing with the NTSB and the Safety Commission to try to get the 7000 series back in service. So I think, but longer term, hopefully this issue will be addressed and we'll get to the root cause of this problem, be able to get the 7000 series, and then the budget will support much more frequent service, which I think is important because the number one thing we hear from our riders, it's not fare and it's not cost, it's frequency. They want good, reliable, frequent service. And that's really what we need to strive to provide.
Yeah, should there be some sort of incentive for riders who are sticking it out right now in terms of fare structure? Should they, versus peak versus off peak, that kind of stuff?
We've looked at that. I think it's tricky to do that in our current system. I think what we are looking to do, we did this in September, is we offered quite a few discounts and we saw really incredible numbers in terms of people who took advantage of those discounts. And so that's a discussion, for us to have once we're able to provide more reliable service as sort of a thank you to our riders and also a way to incentivize getting folks back.
Chair Wheeler, let me bring you in here. I did a story recently about a potential bill that's going to be circulated pretty soon by Scott Servell about talking about extending Metro to Prince William County. Does that make sense? Do you want it? And does rail make more sense, or does a rapid bus network make more sense?
Well, it was great that Senator Servell got us that study. DRPT was looking at it. They did a study. It's been rather extensive about extending rail from Springfield to Quantico. It remains to be seen whether it can be cost effective. I think in the end they thought that maybe bus rapid transit would be more cost effective in the beginning. And as someone I was talking to someone recently, really a lot of those systems do start out with bus rapid transit, and when you get the ridership up, you can afford to build the lines out. We would always love to have Metro. I said that. I've been saying that for a long time. That's why I was welcoming the study. I will say that what we've got going on down 66 with the Transform 66 with the express lanes, and we have huge commuter lots that buses are going to come from. It itself will almost be like bus rapid transit running up and down 66. I know it's not the Metro, but it really will alleviate some of that congestion and some of those long hauls that people face. So if we don't start looking at the Metro now, it'll never happen, is what I keep saying. And so I'm always welcoming to look at it. I know the numbers they were putting out there were pretty big. But there's a lot of money around for infrastructure these days, so you never know.
And 66, talk to me about that, because man, that project, basically unzipping the road, putting 2 lanes in each direction, express lane out to Gainesville.
Yeah.
Wow, what a project. I mean, I know Jeff knows all about that because he's done and they're actually looking at another extension, which we'll get into in a second. But that express lane project, that has been just a mammoth project.
Watching it unfold and watching the ramps come down and watching them, wondering how are they possibly going to widen this road because there's no room, and then seeing what they do. It's been a phenomenal. And when it finally gets done, it will be sort of a game changer for our area of the region, because it will have that sort of mass transit aspect going right up and down 66. So I'm looking forward to that. I think everybody is. And at the moment, it's not a bad time to necessarily do it because people are in their houses. So yeah, there is some benefit to that.
Do you believe that there's hope for I-66? Will people have hope when they commute on the road?
I actually think it will work fairly well. I'm pretty sure it will. As a matter of fact, because also with the telecommuting and the change in the patterns, if those are permanent, you know, a lot of the congestion might be alleviated at certain times of the day anyway. And with the express lanes going down the middle, I think it's going to be, you know, a straight shot to various places that people want to go, whether it's directly into DC or even up north or to Loudoun, some of the jobs in Fairfax and Loudoun County.
Yeah,
But
people
course,
like,
yeah, we're working
people-
on getting our own jobs too. So that's the other thing that's transforming Prince William County.
yeah, people like predictability with their commutes, and that's something that might finally offer them a little bit of relief on 66. So your thoughts on express toll lanes? It seems like there's a whole network that's about to start in Northern Virginia. I mean, we're basically already there. Do they make sense? Should we be thinking in those terms? And is paying to get around congestion something that people might be dealing with in the future?
Was that you directing that to me, Adam?
No, I was asking Senator Boisco that if she. Okay.
Oh, thanks. I didn't hear it. Who you asked either.
But I'll get Jeff in a second.
I represent the town of Herndon, about half of Loudoun County, the most populated half, which deals with the toll roads and the express lanes, the Dulles Toll Road and the Greenway. And some of my constituents pay more than $400 a month just to go back and forth from work. And that is not the case for other people around Virginia, even in Northern Virginia. I think that it is an inequity that I was pleased to see that in the Virginia Beach area, they have now developed some sort of a metric that if you make under, I think, $40,000 a year, you would have either free or reduced tolls. I have tried to do that in the General Assembly before, several years ago. But while I applaud that we are able to build new roads and speed up the traffic, I don't like seeing that the people who live in my community are the ones who are paying the burden of it. I really have a problem with it. And I don't think it's equitable for them.
Gotcha. Interesting. Chairman McKay, your thoughts on that? I mean, now the news came out the other day that we're potentially looking at a new extension from Springfield all the way over across the Wilson Bridge.
Well, I mean, I think what you said earlier is true, is there's a network largely in place already. You know, let's remember the root cause. I mean, we were put in a position of having to do this because there wasn't proper money invested in infrastructure for the public's use. And so as a result, you know, the private sector came up with an idea, a way to give travelers options. You know, from a political standpoint, as elected officials, we get complaints every day about a lack of infrastructure. And so when you compare the fact that we had no money to make improvements to much of the infrastructure that the toll roads improved and the options that it provided against doing nothing, the doing nothing option was never really an option we could seriously consider. And so once you have a network as significant as the one that's in place already, you know, it makes sense to complete that network. And from an equity standpoint, if you're going to have toll lanes on the Beltway, well, you know, I have a lot of constituents in the county on both ends of the county that are stretched to the limits to pay these tolls. To be able to provide an option to people in some corridors or some parts of the Beltway that people in other corridors and other parts of the Beltway don't even have is in essence an inequity as well. I do think the toll pricing is out of control. I mean, I've been, you know, pretty consistently saying that for a long time. But, you know, again, I think we have to focus on how many cars get in the toll lanes that aren't in the general travel lanes, and how much capacity does that offer to people who are choosing not to pay the tolls. And the fact that, you know, you can carpool your way out of this. You know, the county's making major investments in things like the huge Springfield commuter lot. We just broke ground on one out in Fair Lakes, designed specifically to have people from parts of the county and from other counties in the region to come there, park, be able to carpool and take advantage of these express lanes without having to pay the tolls at all. And so we need as many options on the table for transportation as we can think of to move people and stop thinking about only moving cars. And so the toll lanes, while I don't like the toll structure, you know, are an instrument that helps some people move. And there are ways to, you know, materially work to get out of your way of paying for those. I do think, since I'm on the soapbox for a moment, I think the biggest colossal fail of toll lanes in probably the history of Virginia, maybe in the country, was building one directional toll lanes on I-95. Talk about an inequity. That's the inequity of all time. I-66 carried the same amount of traffic as the 95 corridor in Fairfax County, was roughly the same amount of mileage, and yet somehow I-66 toll lanes at least are being built in multiple directions. I-95 has cemented poor planning in my mind for a long time on the 95 corridor, because our transportation planners decided that forever people will commute in one direction in the morning and one direction in the evening. And I got news for you. That wasn't happening on 95 before COVID, and it's not going to happen on 95 ever, because it's backed up in both directions. And so that's a long answer to your question. I think tolling has a place in Northern Virginia. I think it's brought infrastructure we desperately needed. I think without it, we wouldn't be doing the American Legion Bridge, which has to happen. I think the system has to work and it has to be complete. But we do have to be very concerned about the inequities that it brings forward, and be thinking about, is it worth that? Or is it better to just put proper public financing into infrastructure in the first place and let the public own these facilities?
Fascinating.
Hey, Adam, can I just, I can't let it pass because we're talking about tolls, and I agree with what Jeff just said, but sort of as a 1A, 1B in terms of improper tolling, I have to, in my Loudoun County hat, throw out the Dulles Greenway as an example of that. I know Senator Boisco represents these constituents as well. So unlike the Beltway or 66, there is no other option. We have a privately tolled facility in Loudoun County that cuts right through the heart of the county, that has always charged significantly more than I think anybody would think is reasonable for tolls, that does not have variable tolling. And so there's just so many things that have gone into that. And one of them is that Loudoun County has had to spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars building a road network around it, because residents simply wouldn't and couldn't afford to take it. And therefore we're creating congestion on local roads to try to get into Fairfax County. And so that's been something we've been struggling with. We did make some progress last year in the General Assembly, thanks to Senator Boisco and others who have worked with us to try to look at this differently in terms of how these tolls increases are going to be handled in the future. But, you know, I just heard this week from a resident who wants to know, you know, okay, now you've frozen them potentially in the future, but what about now? It's still a privately owned facility in our county, and I still think there's work that the state government's going to need to do on this. And this is a real concern for us.
And Matt, we may have something coming out this session. I'm working with David Reed and John Bell, and am hopeful that we're going to find some more solutions to make it better for our constituents, because they are being, you know, they are bearing the burden of this, and other areas of the state are not under the same kind of situation. So we work collaboratively and in a bipartisan way. I'm very proud to say that we had Republicans and Democrats together working to make some changes last year, and I expect that will be the case again this year.
But Senator, how do you force a private company's hand? You know, how do you, what changes can you force them to do?
Well, you know, we're working on some legislation to talk about that, and we're actually we've been in constant conversation with the private company and their representatives over the past few years to try to find some solutions. So we'll see if we have something ready for the General Assembly session.
Yeah, I mean,
Adam, it is a regulated entity, no different than any other utility. So it does answer to the State Corporation Commission, and that's been one of the issues in terms of how the SEC's handled those cases. That's going to change moving forward, but also the transparency coming from them that you would expect of all the other utilities.
I mean, and it also highlights, you know, decisions when they're made. They have consequences sometimes, and
yeah, that was made in the 80s, so none of us here can be blamed for that. But yeah,
I remember talking to was Congressman Wolf about that a long time ago. All right, Chair Wheeler, since 95 came up, and Jeff mentioned that, Chairman McKay mentioned that, you know, your thoughts about what it's going to take to to fix that, because in many ways, 95 is a different animal because it's America's main street, right? Or it's the East Coast's main street. And it's not just locals, it's everybody. So what is the solution there? Obviously, we've got the express lanes that can go back and forth, but is it more rail, or what do you foresee happening there?
You know, I mean, I think it's America's highway. I mean, I take 95 up to New England. And how do you deal with that? It's not just a commuter road. And so, you know, for the short answer is, you know, we're trying to do our part in making sure that the ingresses and egresses that go along our borders don't back up into 95. That was one of the things that, you know, that we found that if, you know, whatever is happening at those exits can't affect the people going through. You know, if I'm not mistaken, there is a plan to extend the express lanes even further going south, which, you know, it can't hurt if it's just a way to move people more quickly. I will say it is hard. When I was coming back from DC today, I jumped on the express lanes because the traffic was stopped on the other side, and that's typical. This is probably a problem that's been way above my pay grade for a long time. And I think it's, you know, I'll leave this to people who've been around longer to say, how are we going to fix the 95 problem? I do know that we are trying from a, you know, an exit and ingress standpoint, trying to fix it so we don't affect people around the Prince William County area. And we've made some strides with that, with some of the things they've done. But it's an ongoing problem. And how do we get people off of 95? You know, better ways. And that might just be, you know, commuter buses going up 95, but we already have some of those.
Yeah, that's interesting thought process for sure. All right, a question here from the chat, and anyone is free to jump in on this one. Northern Virginia has been very innovative in creating the Northern Virginia Economic Development Alliance. It's exciting to see a joint effort to grow the environment and attract talent to the entire region. How does that regional effort fit into a regional transportation push for van pool and transit? So I guess the question is, you know, with an eye on the environment, how are we planning transit projects, transportation projects? And anyone, please feel free to jump in.
I'll just say one of the things that we've been working on in the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, which the three, you know, Ann and Jeff and I all serve on, is on the electrification of the transportation system. And we are putting a lens on the environment and equity in the scoring of the projects that we approve. So that's one thing that we're doing. And I don't know if anybody wants to chime in and add to that.
What I think, and I'll just, as what Chair McKay always says, is that, you know, the roads don't have any boundaries. They don't know you're crossing over a county line. And I know that we've worked with Fairfax on different things like Route 28. And I think having a regional authority like NVTA really does help with some of those regional projects that we've gotten going over the last 5 or so years. I mean, there is also, you know, what we've determined is that there's inner core needs and outer core needs. And I think we're starting to recognize that, you know, I've always said a push for electrification, since we don't have the mass transit out in Prince William County like the inner core does. We need to push for electrification of vehicles in the outer exurbs because that would give us the most bang for the buck. And those are all sort of cooperative ideas in terms of funding on a regional basis that I think will be useful.
And I'll just say, Adam, you know, having been in elected office for a while now, I can't think of a time where our region had worked better together than we do now from a local government standpoint. And so I think this, you know, what happened, it has been something I've been hoping happened for a long time. Our jurisdictions are not competing with each other. You know, we're competing with metropolitan areas in other parts of the country. And one thing that this group has done well is, you know, really advertising that, but also helping us through NVTA, through NVTC, so some of our other regional transportation bodies that we serve on, is to understand where the future growth patterns are, so that we can make sure, you know, adequate infrastructure is being planned as we move forward. And so, you know, I'm also going to take this opportunity just to make people on the call aware, because you know, we've talked about the future legislation that might be coming. One of the things that I've heard is that there might be legislation to set aside money at NVTA for pedestrian and bicycle projects. And I will just tell you, I think that's the worst idea of all time. And I'm somebody who's the strongest proponent of bike and pedestrian improvements you can meet. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars on those things in the county already. And the minute you start putting restrictions on NVTA and start doing their job for them from Richmond, it makes their job a lot harder. And what will end up happening is the exact opposite, which is localities who have to put in more money for projects that are being delayed because of this new set-aside requirement will spend less money on pedestrian improvements in their own jurisdiction and more money on those mega projects. And so, I did want to take an opportunity while I had the soapbox here to say, when we look at the next General Assembly session, Jennifer is exactly right. Senator Boisco's work on getting the rest of the $38.5 million for NVTA is absolutely critical to putting in the infrastructure that we need to support these regional economic development projects. But any effort to set aside money for anything at NVTA that doesn't already go through our scoring philosophy and has the potential to upset the pipeline of projects literally will take money away from where we already are. And so as much as we need to advocate for the extra money, we also need to be, as a region, advocating against any effort that sets aside any of that money, because having that ultimate flexibility is what makes these projects happen. And that's one of the things that NVTA is masterful at, is pulling together money from state, federal, local governments to make these projects happen. If you take away that flexibility from them, you literally will end up taking away dollars and taking away projects. And so I think we just got to keep our eye on both pieces of that and do that as a region together.
Senator Boisco, has that just kind of been the wording of legislation? It sounds like Chairman McKay is saying it's not broke, so don't fix it. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that because we have a lot of new members who are going to be coming in. There were several new members who were just elected. They're going to come in with new ideas. They're going to come in with these thoughts of fixing everything. And, McKay is exactly right. What we're doing, using our criteria at the NVTA, is absolutely, it takes out the politics of it. It focuses on what is the most important and, vital projects. We want to maintain that authority to make those decisions for ourselves up here instead of having it taken away. So while we certainly love the input, we like to make sure that we have the funding and the ability to make the decisions, because we're the people who live here, instead of having somebody in Richmond make those decisions for us and taking money away from the projects that we know we need.
Interesting. I'm glad that the topic of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure came up, because it's another thing that I cover an awful lot. And one of the things that I've covered way too much in this past year or year and a half is pedestrian deaths and bicyclist deaths. And I've been on a number of recent scenes where it had just happened, and it's horrible. It's unbelievable. And this goes back to so many of our commitments to Vision Zero. So I'd like to get all of your thoughts on Vision Zero as a whole, whether or not it's just lip service, or whether there is anything within the program that actually makes a difference. And Supervisor McKay, or Chairman McKay, we can start with you.
Yeah, well, I support Vision Zero. I think it is a good program, but it's not the only one. We need a lot more answers than that. And really, it comes down to infrastructure. When we plan new projects, we have to plan them to include instinctively what I said earlier, which is we as a region need to be about moving people and not just moving cars. And so what we've done in Fairfax is we recently adopted what's called an active transportation plan. And that active transportation plan, overlays our comprehensive plan and our transportation priorities plan to make sure that, pedestrian, bicycle, those facilities carry heavy weight in the county. And certainly we require them when all new development is built. But we have a lot of older areas of the county that hasn't experienced a lot of development, which is why things like, the Embark Richmond Highway Plan are so important. You have old corridors like that in counties where you have incomplete infrastructure, sidewalks that just end, poor lighting, not good pedestrian facilities. And so this is another pandemic thing that has taken on steam that, a lot of us felt strongly about this before it. But during it, we felt a lot more people out using these facilities, and that has sustained itself. That has not gone away. And so the demand for those is important. And as we approach these things as a region, if we're not thinking outside of the car, again, this goes back to the tolling question about providing people options. If the infrastructure doesn't exist, the option doesn't exist. And, you know, people ask me all the time, well, have you done projections on how many people use that trail connection or sidewalk connection? Well, if it doesn't exist, you can't really do a projection because right now no one is, or they're not doing it safely. And so I think this is one piece of the puzzle. You know, we've invested, you know, over $500 million in pedestrian, bicycle, trail connections, bus stop improvements, bus pads, crosswalks, just in the last couple of years. And so that's hardened infrastructure that will provide smarter growth in the future and help with these pedestrian accidents. But I think you need the effort that you mentioned. You need active transportation. Frankly, you need a lot of work on our public safety officials, reminding people of what the rules of the road are. We've had some campaigns in multiple languages. We've gone out to communities, to churches, to places of worship, schools, reminding people what the rules of the road are, because they're not meant to be punitive. They're meant to save lives. And too often I see too many pedestrian accidents where, regardless of the infrastructure, you have people crossing where there's no crosswalk, where there's no countdown signal, where there's no traffic light, where it's dark. And so, you know, infrastructure is part of the answer. Education is part of the answer. But all of these things are part of the puzzle. There's no one program that's going to solve this problem for us, and they all have to be working together.
Gotcha. Supervisor.
Can I jump in on that? So in Loudoun, it's kind of interesting because we have new metro stations coming in, and we know we're going to have a lot of pedestrian activity around that. Because it's planning from the start, we could plan to have the appropriate number of sidewalks and trails. We have a priority sidewalk and trails program where we're building 3 to 5 miles of missing pedestrian links every year. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you go through the amount of right-of-way you need and utilities and things like that, it gets expensive and it's difficult to do. But the other piece of it, like what Jeff just said, sometimes you do have to think outside of the box, and sometimes building roads actually also helps you with your pedestrian links. You know, for instance, I mentioned the Route 50 corridor. Right now, today, as a pedestrian or as a bicyclist, there is no crossing. There's no crosswalks. There is no crossing anywhere in Loudoun County on Route 50 because it's simply not safe to. You just can't do that with a highway of that speed and that volume. So the interchange improvement program, which is just in its infancy, if we were able to get an overpass and an interchange, you can build now a pedestrian component to that. And we've just done that at Route 7, for instance, in Loudoun County Parkway and Belmont Ridge Road, where we're able to put those type of facilities in. So the good thing is I think we've all gotten a lot better at planning these things into new projects. As Jeff said, it's much more difficult when you have to kind of retrofit it into a place that wasn't built for that, because you do run into a lot of these issues. But I think sometimes I see this discussion as being roads versus multimodal, and it really is both. And we have to look at all of that as part of one combined solution and not pit things against each other.
If I could just jump in, that we, even at our last night's board meeting, we discussed pedestrian safety and traffic safety, and we're going to have a whole presentation on it because we have had the pedestrian deaths. And part of that sometimes feels like it's related to the pandemic and people driving a little bit differently than they did before all this happened. But it's also realizing that the older roads that we're in weren't put in with the walkability, and people are, when some of that exists and they don't have the connectors. And so we have a whole focus on how we make our roads more walkable, how we put the safety in. And we have even brought up the idea of, do we bond out some of those safety projects, because the infrastructure is expensive. If you're talking about a pedestrian bridge over a 4-lane road, it's not inconsequential, $10 million. And do we want to bond some of those out? But I think for some, pedestrian safety is on the forefront of everybody's mind these days, as we all stay home closer and people are around their communities more. I think it's going to definitely be a focus.
Yeah, and Senator Boisco, quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll take. They've talked about the infrastructure. That some of the things we've done legislatively have been making a law that texting and driving is illegal now, and you can be. I think it's a misdemeanor, and we've also done some legislation around making sure that a person is checking behind them when they're opening their door, when they park to look for a bike. You know, like you've said, Adam, there have been too many fatalities for pedestrians and bicyclists from people who are not paying attention to their driving. And so we're trying to take, you know, another approach that way as well. The final thing is, as we are getting new cars out on the roads who have more self-driving automated functions, they can identify when somebody is in front of them and the car will stop itself. I know I have a car, I have a Prius that can tell if there's something in the way, it'll stop, it'll slow down, it'll alert me. And so as we're getting these smarter cars, hopefully that will also help alleviate this problem. But it's something that I think it's a multi-pronged approach, and glad to work with the local communities on it.
Yeah, and it's a tough one. It really is tough. It takes responsibility on so many different fronts, and we hope it gets better. I'm being told we are just about to wrap up. I do want to have a quick lightning round, though, before I give it back to Jeff and Doug. Has anyone been through the new security checkpoints at Reagan National? Nobody? Nobody's flown through? Oh,
I'm the dullest district
fly out of
supervisor,
Dulles,
Adam.
yeah.
I can't go to Reagan National.
Welcome, Dulles.
Regionally here. I'm thinking regional. I flew out of Dulles to get down here. It was a great experience. I still love the people movers. I still think, you know, they're fantastic. But
Adam,
okay.
I'm not sure there's another person in the world that would say that. So congratulations.
Retro. All right. Well, I'll be interested. The next time we have this, I'll be interested to get your thoughts on the new security checkpoints, because they've been, you know, it's radically changed the way Reagan National is for an airport that we all know so well. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining. I'm hand it back now over to Jeff and Doug, and really appreciate all your candor, great response. Good to see
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. Outstanding job and a fascinating and very informative conversation. Doug, we were going to wish everybody happy holidays and a very prosperous new year. And what else do we have to add? Obviously, you're welcome to join us in the membership of Data, but let me hand it over to our president, Doug.
Yeah, I want to thank our panelists as well. Thank you again for etching out some time for us. It's really the stars aligned. We got all of you on the Zoom at one time. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we can do it again next year. And with that, we have been recording this session, and will probably appear on our website not too long. If anyone wants a copy of it, just let us know. Happy holidays and happy new year. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks, guys.